Thank you. Thank you. I don't know who wrote that bio, but thank you, Heidi. That's she's an amazing staff member, by the way, for those that don't know her. Incredible, incredible. Okay, so let me start out by acknowledging Pastor Ed, his lovely wife, and all of those that are here today. This is a place I needed to be and was looking forward to being with you. As I thought about all of the places that I have gone, this was definitely something that was dear to my heart. So thank you, Pastor Ed, for the invitation. And thank you, Pastor Greg. A couple of things I just want to, let's put that up, that one screen. I'm going to, and then I'm going to start on my discussion. I want you to follow us at HHS Partnership. If you have a phone, you can just take a picture. That's our most recent substance use disorder toolkit that's been released in English and Spanish. And the middle is all about the Partnership Center. And the last one is a PSA that we created to help promote 988, our nation's newest suicide prevention lifeline. And so if you take a picture of that, it's a 3-minute PSA that we recorded with pastors with lived experiences addressing stigma and promoting 988. And we think this is very important because what we are dealing with in a lot of our circles is the issue of stigma. And so we as leaders have to be on the forefront of that to help break down that wall. So that's a 3-minute video. You can post it in your social media. You can place it in on your announcement screens, or however you do it. We really want to promote this far and wide. At the center, and I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but we focus on 5 areas. One is obviously the continue to work around vaccines, boosters, vaccinations, et cetera. And again, I need to do that plug right now. Please get your boosters if you haven't. Please encourage your congregation to get their boosters if they haven't. The second focus area is obviously suicide prevention. The third is youth mental health. The fourth is substance use disorder, inclusive of overdose prevention. And the fifth is maternal health. The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate than any developed nation in the world. So that is definitely a focus area for the center. So let's get into our discussion today, leading while bleeding. Growing up in nature projects in Spanish Harlem, as you heard, with my bacalaitos, arroz, capoya, sugar canes for 10 cents off the street back in the day. In your bathroom, there's always this mirror that's either above your toilet or above your sink, and we called it medicine cabinets, right? We still have them. We still call them that. And so it was really a medicine cabinet, just full of medicine. And then because of the shortage of space in my kitchen, in my mom's kitchen, to the right in the cabinet, when you open it, where there should have been dishes were more pills. Because my dad, Purple Heart, has suffered with PTSD coming from the war. And so that whole section, and probably if I knew what I know today, it could have been different. But that whole section was filled with medicine. So my memories, my dad loved us as much as he could, present, not present. But he loved us, loved God. The memories there were the nighttime screams and the howling because of the suffering mentally. We didn't know. And it wasn't like our house was so large that we couldn't hear anything. It was so small and we could hear everything. And it was 8 children, plus mom and dad in the 3-bedroom. And then all of a sudden, it was a major emergency. We just sort of kept our ears to the door because the ambulance was there to take my dad away because he's had a nervous breakdown. No one thinks in these moments of what do our children need so that they can process and handle what they're seeing and what they're hearing. I remember being in camp and I got a call that my friend, 13 years old, had to jump out the window because the fire was flaming in her home. She actually had ran out the door and she was saved, but she ran back in to save her dad, who was an abuser. She couldn't get out, so she jumped out and she died, unfortunately. And then her two siblings were left who never received help, and they too turned to substance use. And so within my own home, I remember my sisters and my brothers, and we all know the amazing message on the spiritual determinants of health, and then there were the social determinants of health, right? So my whole neck of the woods, Carver Projects, right there in the midst of Spanish Harlem, was known for the zip code of having high addiction and crack, etc. So we did not cope very well with what was going on in the household. So you had your mom trying to be like Superwoman for everyone, but yet she couldn't be. And so my brother turned to the streets and turned to heroin and was pretty much in and out of prison. I kept trying to remember when he wasn't. And so while he was in prison, or possibly when he was on the streets, he contracted HIV/AIDS from sharing the needles. It was, back in the 80s. And so it was pretty rough. Then we find out years later that he actually had a bad blood transfusion from Rikers Island. Meningitis of the brain, so many different ailments, you couldn't quite know what really was the last diagnosis. Everything started spiraling downhill because what I shared with you on Friday was one of the worst statements that we lived with as a family, as a race, was what goes on in the house stays in the house. So it stayed in the house, it stayed in our house mentally, it stayed in our house psychologically, it stayed in our house of our emotions. And we had to internalize and process all of this, and how we responded was catastrophic. My two sisters ending up on crack addicts, actually 3 sisters, and that was 3 out of 4. And I'm grateful that they all exited that life. One no longer with us, who just passed last week. I had to be here. That's it. And then I thought about my brother, college graduate. I remember him playing basketball in what they call Spanish Park or Black Park, and got hit by a stray bullet. But he went on to college, he graduated. Things started deteriorating after that. But none of these cases, in any of these cases, did we seek help. And even my mom at one point just wanted to keep it quiet that my brother had died. That's how much things stayed in the house. And I love her today. She's my friend, she's a prayer warrior. But my brother ended up being that person that howled on the opposite side of the staircase. And then I remember passing him on the street. They called him Ernie Ern. And his hair was matted. He had cans in a shopping cart that he was pushing. And it was because what went on in the house stayed in the house. And the trauma that came with it, you don't realize the trauma that comes with it until it begins to manifest. Because of the stigma. Nearly 1 in 5 adults in the US, approximately 20% of the population, lives with a mental illness of some kind, and yet, in spite of its prevalence, there remains a pervasive stigma around mental illness in many modern cultures, and it takes a variety of different forms, from negative attitudes to differential treatment to outright discrimination. My research on how stigma manifests shows that it does in a variety of ways. 1, perpetuation of harmful stereotypes or prejudices about people who suffer from mental illness. They are violent, they're unpredictable, or they are just acting out for attention. Even refusals of landlords or employers to offer housing or employment opportunities to people with mental illness. You find poorer quality of care for their physical health problems from healthcare providers. Then you have the insensitive treatment or lack of understanding on the parts of friends, family members, or acquaintances. We found that youth who were talking about their mental illness online and potential suicidal, their suicidal ideations, found themselves being bullied even more. As with most forms of stigma or discrimination, the stigma surrounding mental health issues is rooted in lack of knowledge about what mental illness is and how it works. Many people still believe that mental illness is a choice, or that people with mental illness are aggressive and unstable. What's more, mainstream media and entertainment often feed these stereotypes by portraying characters with mental illness as crazy or dangerous in TV shows and movies. And these connections are further reinforced by the sensationalization of news that has to do with crimes committed by people with mental illness, in spite of the fact that research has shown that people with mental illness are more likely to be victims of crimes than perpetrators. Mental health stigma is particularly insidious because it can easily become internalized by the person who experiences it. If an individual is continually treated as though they are inadequate or unworthy, they may come to believe it themselves. This in turn can result in reduced hope and self-esteem, isolation, and worsening of their psychiatric symptoms. Moreover, if that person comes to expect rejection or discriminatory treatment, they may be less likely to seek care or work toward opportunities that could improve their lives. And this isn't just about those we serve. It's about us as leaders. This exists in religious culture as well. I remember reading about the challenges for the Muslim community. Only a handful of very large mosques have paid staff to manage the mosque. Therefore, the vast majority of mosques, 76%, are managed entirely by volunteers, and half of American mosques have a full-time paid imam, only half. In his recent piece in E-Jewish Philanthropy, Rabbi Louis Kamaras, president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, warned of the real possibility of an exodus of rabbis from congregational life due to the extreme additional emotional and professional burdens imposed upon them by the pandemic. In the African American community, one study showed that 63% of Black people believe that a mental health condition is a sign of personal weakness. And as a result, people may experience shame about having a mental illness and worry that they may be discriminated against due to their condition. Fear also could prevent people from seeking mental health care when they really need it. And this was the case of my family. The fear, we were labeled crazy back then if you even admitted to any type of mental illness. And this is why it was the case of why we checked so many boxes as it related to ACEs. So if it's not tended to or checked early on, if we're not focusing on prevention, it has the potential of following us as we develop as leaders. I was 10 years old. Horrific incident happens. Run up to the house, the apartment. My mother sees me. She goes, she grabs a knife, runs downstairs to chase the perpetrator. Couldn't find the perpetrator. We went in the house, we sat down, we had dinner, I washed the dishes, I went to bed, I woke up, and I went to school. Silent around the table, never to be discussed again. It brought me to a place as I became leader of leading while bleeding. Because I had to internalize, I had to process on my own the why. And at the end of the day, I had to have been the reason, the why. I had to have been the reason. Well, maybe if I hadn't spent that extra $10 to get that bag of potato chips, maybe, and then I had to run down real quick to eat it, maybe I would have never encountered that. Well, maybe if, what if, that was my whole processing. A 10-year-old should never have to process on their own. Internalize. My house was in disrepair. My house was breaking to the point where I remember asking whomever could hear me, why is it that I was born? Not what was I born to be or do, but why was I even here existing? Beginning of suicidal ideation. That set me up in my adult life to find myself leading while bleeding. I internalize, Band-Aid, boom. Laceration, cut, everyone sees the bleeding, boom. There's the neosporin, here's the bandage. That's easy. We see the bleeding. Internal bleeding is quite different. Bleeding that can't be seen with the naked eye. A finding in research in internal bleeding, most internal bleeding may occur in many areas of the body. It may cause significant local inflammation, swelling, and pain. And if enough bleeding occurs, the person may go into shock. The internal bleeding may occur within tissues, organs, or in cavities of the body, including the head, the spinal canal, the chest and abdomen, or even the eye within tissues that line the heart, muscle, and joints. Symptoms of signs of internal bleeding depend on where the bleeding is coming from, but may include headache, they say stiff neck, confusion, stroke symptoms as vision loss, weakness, and slurred speech, alcohol, medications, and trauma, just to name a few. So we need to know, where is our bleeding coming from? Perhaps it's in the overwhelming demand that has opened up a half-closed wound, or a wound that simply had a Band-Aid on it, or exhaustion from not knowing that no, N-O, is in our vocabulary. I'm guilty, easier said than done. Perhaps it's the past trauma that we've never dealt with, as in my case, so trigger after trigger after trigger. Perhaps you've bitten off more than you can chew, and God may be telling you to scale back for your own health. He does have rams in the bush. And we know we can be but so much prepared for catastrophe. What are we doing? But what are we doing on the front end for ourselves to perhaps be a little better prepared? Again, everyone is different and every role is different. What are we doing intentionally? As I stated with internal bleeding, if enough bleeding occurs, the person may go into shock. If enough bleeding occurs, we will be incapacitated to lead. These have led to life-altering decisions for many of our leaders, one that we don't want to see coming and be left with, what happened? I didn't know he was suffering. She was suffering the way he was. She kept it to himself, herself, and never took time to determine the origin of the bleeding, nor to seek help. Bleeding while bleeding. Therefore, we must identify and locate and be transparent with ourselves. And that's hard today sometimes, just transparent. Because sometimes I remember part of my trauma was not liking, not loving, and not wanting to see myself in the mirror. I would prefer to turn the mirror on you because it made me feel better if I had someone to blame. And we're not going to allow stigma to stop us from dealing with it. My sister Jaretha, who I said just passed, used to say, as she was exiting this whole substance abuse life, she said, I'm just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And sometimes we have to get to that point to really get the help that we need. And we no longer can try to cover up that problem with staying busy. I know what that is, that 24/7 Superman complex. Here I am to save the day. You can't save the day if you can't save yourself. What I mean is that if you aren't taking care of you, and if I'm not taking care of me, and the pressure of expectations from others known in the community for all the great work that we do, how do we stop to say, I need help? And I'm feeling the inflammation from the bleeding, the pressure that's developing around my heart, and my breathing has been affected by it. I'm feeling the pain, and every now and then, sharp pains through my chest area, and I'm dealing with it. Why? Because my people need me. Wrong. Your people need you well. So we find ourselves bleeding. I believe some of us, and I know for sometimes as I thought about how the trauma has affected me, we have this built-in like self-sabotage button, right? That we kick it in every now and then because there's a part of us that wants to feel needed, depended upon. We embrace this codependency because of the trauma. And as I mentioned, it's that whole Superman piece where we're here to save the day. But again, we can't save the day if we aren't saving ourselves and prioritizing our mental health. And it's hard to say and admit I'm not okay because of the expectancy of leaders, of faith leaders, to always be on point, never miss a beat. So we create this false narrative and hide behind our titles and degrees, our accolades, our resumes, when in essence, we may be bleeding, and no alcohol, no drug can stop that bleeding except it exasperates it. In March 2022, 42% of Christian pastors considered resigning, up from the 29% who did the same in January 2021. Two of the biggest reasons clergy cited were immense stress and feelings of isolation and loneliness. Another Lifeway research study of pastors concluded that 84% say they're on call 24 hours a day, and 54% find the role of pastor frequently overwhelming. Combined with the 2020 COVID-19 crisis and the massive logistical, relational, and financial pressures our churches are facing, its leaders are facing significant challenges. According to a study from the Rice University Department of Sociology, the stigma surrounding mental health, along with the lack of access to adequate care, has left many minorities untreated, especially in the Black and Latino communities. The study also found that many congregation members feel safer talking with a pastor or minister than a psychiatrist or counselor. And I remember when we did our first Can You Hear Me Now youth having their say on mental health and suicide prevention, they said, you adults need to make sure you're okay before you're trying to make us okay. That resonated with all of us on that call. The Duke Clergy Initiative launched one of the most comprehensive studies on clergy health of its kind. And one of their key findings, clergy's practice of putting others first can be detrimental to their own health, including their mental well-being. And I would take that to mean that prioritizing another person's mental health when we can barely keep it together doesn't help either one of us. But this initiative identified 4 key strategies that help pastors flourish and leaders. Pastors who implement practices like prioritizing their mental health or nourishing friendships flourish in their careers. The Duke Clergy Health Initiative found. That means that you and I have to be intentional. Can you say that word with me, intentional? And here are some of the ways they prioritize, and here are the ways they flourished. In this study, there were 2 pastors that were identified as super flourishers. They were veterans, 30 years in the ministry. I hope to be that one day. So far as a super flourisher, what a label. And, and here are their recommendations. One, reading the Bible or whatever you're, and this may sound basic, but you know what? We need to do more of the basics. Because I feel like sometimes we get away from the basics, the things that keep us grounded, the things that remind us of the why we do what we do. And so one of the things they said was reading the Bible or whatever your sacred text leads you in the early morning. Next thing they said was taking a walk. They took it along the greenway. Also accepting a congregant's offer to help or someone else's offer to help, because we're good at helping others, but not so good at accepting help. Like a lot of people, they felt more comfortable serving than being served, serving than being served. Next thing they encouraged was just taking care of body and spirit, walking and running and exercise. They said flourishing pastors are intentional about taking care of their physical and mental health, intentional. They set boundaries around their work and personal lives. And I know what it is to be like running from one fire to the next and forgetting that I even set boundaries myself. I had to remind myself, you're about to hit burnout if you don't get off that wheel, cue English. So we have to ask ourselves, what boundaries have we set for ourselves? One of the pastors said, I wish I had known and done it sooner, because setting boundaries is very important, and to have others respect those is a good thing. Another pastor said he tells his staff parish relations committee of his self-care practices so they can support him and help him be accountable. He said, I've learned that I am responsible for myself. He said, I tell them I try to keep myself ready to be a faithful pastor, and I need your support in maintaining these practices. He said, I'm trying just to do what's right and what's best. Next, they nourish friendships and mutual relationships. And then they work in alignment with God. Both said they work to feel the presence of God on a daily basis, taking time again to read their sacred text. The study further pointed out that flourishing pastors and not pastors with burnout reminded themselves often of where God was leading them. It seemed that pastors experiencing burnout were too much in the thick of distress to focus on the larger goals. We must focus on the larger goals and not be caught up in the weeds. The pastor said, flourishing for me has been accepting the things that are out of my control. And that can be difficult as leaders, faith leaders, nonprofit leaders, because we find ourselves in control of everything. But he said, it is important to accept the things that were out of his control. In a decade-long survey taken through this initiative, they found significant differences in the younger clergy, ages 35 and under, over 3/4 being more intentional in Sabbath-keeping behavior than those over 35, about 54%. And by vocational clergy, those working in another vocation in addition to serving in a ministerial role, reported the lowest rates of intentional Sabbath keeping at just over 42%. Sabbath should be a part of our spiritual and emotional wellness. And we understand home life emergencies, I've had them, family situations may shorten the day to hours, but it's not the length of time, but it's in the quality of time and what keeping it sacred looks like to you. Today, I would be not telling the truth if I wouldn't say right now that I'm still bleeding, just not as heavy as in the past when I recognized I was bleeding while bleeding. When I recognized why I was responding and reacting the way I was. What was it, those things that caused me to feel like at times I was a wounded animal? You ever approached a wounded animal? You approach that wounded animal, you're going to get bit. And sometimes I had a bite. And then I was recognizing, what are these reactions coming from? What are these reactions that doesn't allow me to get off this 24/7 piece? What are those things that make me want to please everyone, not recognizing that my one goal is to please God? But yet for me, being a man pleaser perhaps would make me more of a God pleaser because I'm pleasing them. I had it twisted because of the trauma that I went through that created that world for me. Because that was the way I had to express and let out and let go and make myself feel better. And recognizing that there were times that I felt like I had to live life by permission. It's like, Mother, may I? Make you happy, then I'm happy. You happy? I'm happy. Oh, yeah, I'm happy. You accept me? Oh, I'm so great. But those were all wrong. It was wrong because it was based on the trauma that I experienced, and the way for me to escape that trauma and escape those horrible incidents was for me to compensate it that way. Until I realized, man, you're loved. You've been accepted in the beloved. You don't have to work your way in. You don't have to work your way in. You don't have to do like 1,000 confessions that he's forgiving God, and that's a cue you needed to be in a place where you can forgive yourself. And forgive yourself, give others, love yourself, love others. But it was that awful will that I found myself on, leading while bleeding. And you thinking your leading is great, you're not even recognizing that you were bleeding. So it's not as heavy as in the past when I recognized I was. And what I learned is that retreating is okay. It's okay to think. I thought about that song by Twyla Paris, The Warrior is a Child. It's from way back in the day. And it just says, lately I've been winning battles left and right, but even winners can get wounded in the fight. People say that I'm amazing, strong beyond my years, but they don't see inside of me, I'm hiding all the tears. They don't know that I go running home when I fall down. They don't know who picks me up when no one is around. I drop my sword and cry for just a while, because deep inside this armor, the warrior is a child. In our recent interfaith conversation we had a couple of weeks ago at the center around stigma and suicide prevention in the faith community, with representatives from the Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, and Christian community, here were a few of our takeaways I want to leave with you. One of the rabbis said, those who close their eyes never see tears. A survivor of a Holocaust was asked, how did you survive? He said, you can go 3 days without water, you can go 3 days without food, but you can't go 3 days without hope. And then as long as there's breath, and this is my belief, and this is how I live, as long as there's breath, there is hope. You are not alone, they said. There is always someone to whom you can reach out because you have community. Community is significant. God, the next person said, God is an emotional being who also cares about our emotions. There is unconditional love and acceptance. You don't need to suffer in isolation and silence. And our needs in life are facilitated through our natural connections, our required connections. We are all connected to each other. We all emanate and perfuse the divine. When we tap into that divine together, we do better because we do it together. It was like, seek help, be patient in seeking help, and don't give up. I think for me, what has been important to my transformation, not only seeing myself, but accepting community and recognizing that I am not in this alone. As we look around this room, we recognize that we're all in this together. And remember, you and I are not called to be the fixers. You know, we have been fixing things all of our lives until we don't recognize that our fixing at times are creating more cracks in the already broken areas. I was thinking about a decorated vase. You know, if that decorated vase just falls to the ground and it cracks and shatters in pieces, we want to fix it, right? Get our super glue out, and we're starting to put all these broken pieces back together, and you know it never looks the same, because that's not our job. It's God's job. It's God's job. You know that whole saying that Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again, but God can. And I recognize that in my life, that although I was splattered all over the place, God had a way of coming in and showing me love and grace and mercy and putting me back together again. God bless. Thank you. What I'd like us to do in these next just a few minutes before we go into, let's just have a Selah moment. Let's just have a think about it moment. And if you wouldn't mind, just think about what intentional looks like for you. If you want to write it down, or just think about what you're shifting in some of the priorities, I think that's helpful. I find myself doing that ongoingly because I'm just not perfect, and reevaluating. It's okay to reevaluate ongoingly. You know, we create these plans and these, what we're going to be doing moving forward. And sometimes we don't adhere to even that, because consistency and discipline can be something that we work at very, very hard. But take a moment to think about, even after today, when you go your separate ways and go into your homes and be with family, think about what's going to be different. Think about how you're going to maybe lead with a little less leading. I encourage you to really think about it. Yeah, we know you're doing great works. Keep doing the great works. But in the absence of you taking care of you, those great works will come to an end. We need you around. We need you healed. We need you thriving. We need you recovering. We need you to be out there doing what you're called to do. But we want to see us whole in doing it. Take care of you. Take those moments. Turn off social media. Turn off the computer. Make yourself less available on those emails, on those chats, on those Twitters. Doesn't matter if you have 2 following or 1 million. What matters is that you're making impact, and impact starts with you. Wellness care, mind health care, emotional care. We're not going to fake it till we make it. That's not what we're doing. We're going to take care of us. We're going to be genuine. We're going to be transparent with ourselves, with our family, and just let the balls drop where they may, because there's such a great release when you find yourself just being honest. Doesn't matter how great you can preach. Doesn't matter if you can preach the house down. Doesn't matter how many degrees you have. If you're not well mentally and emotionally, you won't be effective in doing the work that God has called you to do. I am so grateful. I look around this room and I think of all the work that's being done and your desire to help and to serve and to be healed. And it's just so rewarding. That's why my eyes are welling up with tears, to know I'm sitting in a room of change makers, world changers, those that have a desire to make even greater impact. Can we just bow our heads just for a moment? I know this is not typical, but I just want us to pause and think about it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as he did the sinful world as it is not I would have, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will. Grant me that serenity. Amen. Pastor Head.
Thank you. I love the accepting hardships as a pathway to peace part of that. Any questions for Dr. Q? Who's that?
I don't really have a comment. I'm going to cry. I wasn't what I expected. You know, we've heard so much heavy. So we've heard hope, but we've heard a lot of heavy. And so to have this be kind of we have a worship to come, but this is our closing to lift us up and care for ourselves. So thank you. Pray that you care for yourself.
Thank you.
And there is another version of Humpty Dumpty that I used to read to my children. And we had, I think it was Father Gander, I don't know. Anyway, so if I can do this right, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses, all the king's men helped to put Humpty together again.
Okay.
So it's about community.
That's good.
And how do we care for one another?
That's
So,
good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was sitting here listening to you, and my mind went in 5 or 6 different directions.
Yes, sir.
I'm led to talk about the facts relative to why stigma exists within the African American community. I'll save that for another time, because I want to seize this moment that in the atmosphere, it would be inappropriate to do otherwise. Let me thank you and thank God for you for being as honest and as transparent in this moment. It takes a lot of courage to stand before anybody and reveal one's vulnerabilities. And as a student of leadership and a writer and reflector and an applier of leadership principles, one of the greatest things that a leader can do is stand before people and be authentic and transparent, because it engenders trust, it engenders relationship, and it engenders commitment. Because at the end of the day, if you can't trust the leader, and if you can't trust what they say, how can you appropriately join? You called us to join with you, but primarily God, and to reflect upon our own condition, to be available to ourselves so that we can be available to others.
Yes.
I just want to thank God for you and your word today. I really do.
Thank you.
And God continue to bless you in all the efforts that he has put before you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, no one can quite say it like him.
Thank you so much. In telling your story, you told so much of mine.
Mm.
And for so many years, I didn't know how badly I was bleeding as I tried to be a leader. So thank you for your words of health and hope, and to know that I don't have to bleed anymore.
Amen. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
I have a little bit of shame I want to share, because if I share it, I don't have to take it home with me, maybe. I don't think I understood racism until I heard you talk. And I'm not sure I'm ever going to get the image of your 10-year-old little girl out of my mind. And that's okay. I understand a little better. And I'm not sure how to repent a little more. But I do want to ask forgiveness for my misunderstanding, for my lack of action.
Oh,
I just want to embrace your little girl with my little girl. Thank you.
thank you so much. And thank you for your honesty and your transparency. And thank you. No, you don't have to take that with you.
Yes, thank you so much. You transported me back 45 years ago when a man shared with me as I thought I knew exactly where I wanted to go with my ministry. And he simply had the courage to say to me, "You're not ready."
Mm.
He said, "You need to return to your congregation and love them." And the important part is you need to let them love you.
Mm.
And he shared with me what he had done in that regard. And that is the difficult part.
Yeah.
Is letting them,
It is.
being vulnerable enough to let them know when you're bleeding,
Yeah.
when you're hurting, when you need their love. So thank you very much. You reminded me of a very important time in my life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing.
God bless you. Yeah, it's been said, the transparency. The thing that resonates for me is your comments about clergy, pastors, rabbis, imams. Many of them have felt isolated and alone and wanting to quit. And as we sit in the pews, we don't recognize that. As you said, we expect more and more and more. And they're just human like us. And so part of it is just checking my expectations and wanting to redouble what I do to help, to stand in the breach, and to love them so they feel loved, because they sacrifice every day, every week. And thank you for that reminder. I think this is part of what this conference was about, was to understand how we need to support clergy.
Yeah.
not just engage them, but to support them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
have them, help them work with their health.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So anyway, thank you for that.
No, thank you.
for you and for your story.
Thank
Powerful.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I was getting ready to come down here, I thought, thank you, God, for a place where I can be honest
Yes.
in how important it is to recognize my humanity, and just, there's not many places you can share.
Mhm.
And Dr. Ed Seitzer on the
Yeah.
elevator kind of basically said the same thing.
Mm.
And then I walk in here and you give such a blessing.
Mm.
One of the things I appreciated is your honesty in that I will still bleed. I will have triggers. They will be there. And to be prepared. And I myself have found that when I set boundaries, then it gets really difficult because the congregation and others like come at me. You know, it's, you know, new level, new devil. And so how important it is for us to have one another to share with,
Mhm.
because yeah, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. So
Mhm.
thank you so much. I know
Yeah.
I'm repeating, but it just is so heartfelt to hear that need to connect and to connect with God. We're called to lead, and thank you.
You're so welcome, and thank you for sharing. It is a safe place indeed. Yeah.
Get my steps in.
Pastor Ed's getting his exercise.
Thank you so much for this. I think, again, in my work, I work with kids at risk. So sometimes it's hard to not take on their bleeding
Yeah.
as my own. And of course, we that are in a caregiving position have to remember that, you know, when if the plane loses pressure, you're supposed to put on your mask before you help those around you. And sometimes that seems counterintuitive, right? That aren't I supposed to help everybody? So thank you for that. But then I also had this other thought that the Japanese have a method of repairing things. So if they have a piece of pottery that has broken, they don't try to repair it to hide the break. Instead, they repair it with gold. They repair it so that the cracks become a part of the piece. And it's one of those things where that which has made us bleed, that which has caused us harm, has brought us to this point and has become a part of us. And it's not something we should be ashamed of, but it's, you know, we've survived, we've made it here. This is the point at which we are. And so there's that idea that that which is broken does make us stronger in a way, but we are so used to hiding our vulnerabilities instead of saying it's a beautiful thing that we have survived, a beautiful thing that we are still here. So if you ever want to look that up, the pieces that are repaired with gold are stunning, right? Stunning.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Seems like there's a lot of built-in expectation for pastors to be together, you know, to have it together.
Yeah.
And when someone like you comes along and opens up, you give permission for the rest of us to be broken. And I think that's the gift that we as recovering people have to offer the larger church, is to open with our bleeding.
Thank
there
you,
another
Pastor
one?
Ed.
So So the talk was probably 6 months late for me. I run multiple organizations and live in the inner city, and it's just been really challenging 6 months. And actually, when I get back home, I have a meeting with my board where I'd already told them that I'm either resigning or they can put me on a sabbatical because I can't go on.
It's okay.
I felt like you were speaking directly to me. But it was the part that when you talked about the wounded animal, and I told my wife right before we came down that I hate who I've become in the way I respond to everyone. It's not who I want to be. It's definitely not who God has called me to be. But it's the language of, yeah, I'm wounded. Yeah. And I'm cornered, and I'm feeling like everything is coming at me from all sides. Yeah. So you're gonna get the worst of me. And it's easy when, you know, I come from the streets and I have a rough background. And so it's really easy to go to, as a friend of mine would say, to forget your salvation really quick. Mm-hmm. And if you push me, you'll see a side of me that I'm not too proud of, and you're not going to want to see. Mm-hmm. So I just felt like it's, you know, as spiritual people, you should know that the Holy Spirit was speaking through you to me. And there's that certain amount of courage it's going to take for me to do what I need to do when I get back home. Mm-hmm. To take that step of faith into what God has for me, which I know is more, and but to do it without fear. So thank you.
So
Jesus did it. Every now and then we got to step away. It's okay. Thank
Hi.
you.
Hi. Yeah, I have a window that I've kept open on my phone for a long time, a Sojourner's headline about rest is not a reward for the productive. It is a gift of God.
Mm.
But that before that, I was going to say, it occurs to me as someone who's been leading while bleeding for 40 years at least. That's how long I've been ordained. That there are people in the world that are squeamish around blood, and physical blood and emotional and spiritual blood. But I would not be here without the medical people who had dealt with their squeamishness about blood enough to take care of me when I was bleeding. And so I would not be here without the people who are willing to deal with the emotional and spiritual bleeding. And my biggest hope and prayer and dream for this group and all of our founding organizations is we would be a place that can handle blood. Thank you.
Thank you.